Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this morning, which will be on 5 daily checks that you can do just to make sure that all the calls are coming in and being answered on Surgery Connect as you'd expect. So during the session today, we're going to have a look at your user console settings and how you can change those to get the best information on a day-to-day basis for the call flow on the system. And we'll also look then at the 5 daily checks that you can complete. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the user console settings. So the user console can be used to see up-to-date information about all the calls coming through for the practice. And as supervisors, you can also use the console to manage the staff on a day-to-day basis. So to access the console, once you've signed into the single sign-on window, you'll be given your 9 boxes and you're looking for the one that says user console here. When you follow that through, it will take you through to the normal screen. So on the left-hand side, you'll have your inbound and outbound call list area. Down at the bottom of the screen is a status box area, and we'll have a look at the status boxes that you can use to complete the 5 daily checks in just one moment. And then on the right-hand side, we've got our user list area, where we've got all the people that work within the practice split up into the groups of the types of calls that they then deal with. So you can change the settings on the user console to show you information that's useful to you. And to do that, you're going to click on the menu, which is the 3 lines next to your initials, and then access the settings option from that menu. That will then bring up the user console settings screen. And anything down the left-hand side, you can change on your screen and it doesn't affect anybody else's. You might find it handy to make sure that the color active calls is activated. That will mean then that when calls come in on your user console, the whole line will show in the specific color for that particular call. So inbound calls will show in green, outbound calls will show in blue, and if the call is queuing, it will show in red, and it will also tell you the name of the queue or the group that that call is queuing for. If you click onto the stats boxes within the settings in the user console, you can then select the boxes that you can see at the bottom of the screen here. So you can turn on or off individual boxes or just use show panel at the top if you don't want to see them at all. For this presentation, we're going to be looking at the available users box. We'll look at ringing now, queued now, current longest queue, inbound today, answered today, missed today, queued over 10 minutes, and abandoned today. Once you've selected the status boxes that you want on your screen, you can then click on close and they will then appear down at the bottom of the screen in the status box area. You can also have your calendar available on your user console and it will appear up at the top next to our Surgery Connect logo on the left-hand side there. Again, to add that, we're going to use the menu option and then go into settings and then select calendars in the drop down. That will then give you a list of the calendars that are available for your practice. Now, the only one that I'm interested in is the main calendar because that's the one that will control the opening times of your main telephone line. So I'm going to click that on so that we then have the main calendar shown on my user console as well. So that now shows up at the top of the screen and it will show the current status of the calendar at the moment. So now we've set our screen up, we can then move on to our 5 daily checks. So check 1 is, are the calls actually coming through on the system? So on your user console, you should be able to see the calls as they come through into the practice on the screen. You can also check the boxes down at the bottom for ringing now, which will tell you any calls that have got through as far as one of your staff members and is currently ringing on their phone. Make sure that you're looking at the recent calls so that you've got the little lightning strike selected. That will then mean that all your recent calls will appear and the most recent will always be on screen 1 or page 1 at the top of the screen there. You can also make sure that your calendar status is correct as well. Now we can see here that our calendar is currently stuck in training from when we overrode it yesterday. So we've got no calls coming in on the system this morning and nobody answering any calls. So to change that, I'm just going to click on the calendar up at the top of my user console, and that will then allow me to turn it back on to automatic, which at this time of day should normally be open. So that will reopen the phone lines for me immediately. So we can now see that we've got calls coming through, they're ringing on people's phones, and we've got calls queuing on the screen as well. And we can see those in red for the queue that they're queuing for. So that now takes us on to check 2. And check 2 is, are those calls queued? So we saw the calls starting to queue there on the screen. Now that we've opened the phone lines, we've got quite a few calls here that are now queuing, and we can see the name of the team that those calls are queuing for. So all of our queuing calls currently are for our reception team. We can also see the current queued number down at the bottom, and the current longest queue will change as the day goes on, depending on how long people are queuing at this current time. You'll have statistics boxes that will tell you when patients have queued for over a minute, 1 minute to 5 minutes, 5 minutes to 10 minutes, and then over 10 minutes as well. And obviously you can have those on the screen. They will give you an overview for the day if they're in grey there. So we can see now that we've got calls queuing. That will then take us on to our next check, which is check 3, to see whether those calls are being answered. So we can see the queue and the team that those calls are queuing for. So I'm going to filter my groups so that I can see my reception team within my user list over on the right-hand side of the user console. I can also check the available users status box. That's telling me I've got 10 available users at the moment. Remember that the available users, though, are anybody that is logged in and an available status, not necessarily the people that are answering the calls within our reception team. So I'm going to click on the filter in our users here, type in reception into the search box that will come up, and that will then filter my group down to just my reception team. And now I can see what's going on within the team here. So I've got 8 members of that team that are currently active within the group. However, 5 of those aren't currently logged in, so they're showing in dark grey on our user list. If I click the available users, it would actually filter those to just the people that are logged in and available. There are different colours associated with the people within the group here. So Jack is in Do Not Disturb, so he's showing orange on the user list. Joe is making outbound calls only, so she's showing in purple on the user list. And Clara is already on a call, so she has green initials. If the initials were blue, that would indicate that somebody was on an outbound call. And if the initials were red, that would indicate that there's a problem with that user's ID. Now, that's normally because you've left yourself logged in using the soft phone and then just closed down the browser. So the system thinks you should be available, but when it comes to present a call to you, it recognises that the browser isn't actually logged in, so it can't put the call through to the soft phone. So if you see red initials there, it's the system struggling to get those calls through to that particular user, and we need to have a look and see what's going on with that user. Now, as a supervisor, I can change statuses directly from the screen here. So I've got Joe in outbound calls. I'm going to make sure that Joe's taking inbound calls as well at the moment until this queue has been cleared, and then she can go back to her task where she's ringing out the list of patients. To do that, I can just click on Joe's name within the user list. That will then bring up Joe's contact details and her status. And as a supervisor, I can then change that status up to available. When I click on close, that will then update, and we now have Joe and Clara available to take some of these calls, and the calls will start dropping into those users now straight away. That will then take us on to check 4, and check 4 is how long are these queues? So we can see the current queued now and the time spent queuing down at the bottom of the screen. I've made active members available so that they can now take calls, but I still have a lot of calls queuing for the reception team here. Now, I know that within the team, I actually have people that are taking calls in other areas at the moment that could take some of these reception calls. So we have Ben, who's in our appointments team, that could also help out with reception calls. So I'm going to also activate Ben within this team so that he can then help take some of this backlog of calls. I'm going to clear the search for reception and then use the user settings to change Ben's actual active in the group. You can also check the missed calls and abandoned calls. So missed calls are calls that have got as far as a queue and made a menu selection. They're now queuing for your staff members, and then they put the phone down within the queue. An abandoned call, there's not so much that you can do about. Those calls have hung up before they've made any selection in your menus or joined any queues. So you tend to see a lot of abandoned calls just before the system opens in the morning, where people are ringing up and then putting the phone down because the practice is still closed. So let's add Ben into our active group. As I say, I'm going to clear the reception search using the little X on the end here so that I can see all my groups. And then I'm going to want to go to search users and type in Ben's name. I've now got Ben's details up on the screen here. So I can click on his name, bring up his contact details, and I can see the groups that he's a member of. So he is a member of the reception group set up on the service delivery console or through the configuration console. But here, he's not actually active in the reception group. So I can just put a tick next to the reception, and that will then add him to the active group. When I then close this and then research and filter my reception group, we'll see that we've now got Ben, and I've also added Grace as well into the group, who are both available and able to take reception calls to help clear the reception queue here. You can also remove those extra members. So once the queue's been cleared, if Ben needs to go back to his other duties, I can click on his name and remove him from that reception group. So he's no longer looked for as part of the team to take those calls. Finally, check 5 is what other actions can you take? So if you're having to manually add people into groups in the morning in order to help clear the queues, within Surgery Connect, you can use the automatic step-in feature in the groups. So within the configuration console, in the groups section, you can see a tab which has a list of members. That will show you the members that are in the group, but not necessarily active. And you can actually set parameters to automatically step those into a queue when the queue for that group is too large. So you can either set it by the number of people or the time that people have been queuing, and it will then automatically step in those members when it reaches those parameters. The other thing that you could look at would be queue busting, which would give your patients an alternative then, rather than waiting on the phone to be answered, so that the system would then call them back automatically for you. So in a summary, we've got our 5 daily checks. Once you've set up your user console, check 1 will be, are the calls coming through? We can check the ringing now status to make sure it's going through to people, and also check your calendar is in the correct status and is open when the phone line should be open. Check 2 are those calls queuing. So you can check the queued now status box, and also on your user console screen as a supervisor, you'll see all the calls coming through the practice. Are the calls being answered is check 3. We can check our available users status box, and we can filter those down just to the people that are logged in. You can also filter the groups to make sure that the people in the group are available to actually take the calls. Check 4, how long are those queues? We can check the queued now and the current longest queue, as well as your queued time status boxes. And you can step in more users, searching for the user and then just adding them. If they're already in a group in the background, that will then step them into the group temporarily whilst they have the tick on their group management. Alternatively, if it's something that you're having to do often, You can consider using our auto step-in through the groups in the configuration console, or setting up QBuster on the queue to actually alleviate the patients actually queuing for such a long time. So during this session, we've had a look at changing your user console settings, and we've also had a look at the 5 daily checks.